Okay, so good morning, students. In the last session, we have just discussed the overview of the front end phases of your compiler, in which we have seen exactly what sort of representation is going to be changed from one form to another when your code has been given as an input to the respective front end phases here. And we talk about this phase, that is the code optimization. This is the only phase which should be completely treated as optional, and I mean, by most of the compilers. And this phase is not going to change the existing representation of the program. And what is the existing representation of the program? That is the unambiguous representation, where the complete meaning of the program must be known to the compiler, not with respect to the algorithm, with respect to the underlying constructs. So this is whatever we have discussed so far up to the front end phases here. Now today, as I mean, the today's agenda would be, we'll discuss the overview of again the back end phases of your compiler. So when I'm saying backend phases of the compiler, so this is going to be very machine specific. So where we have to take certain decisions corresponding to our underlying architecture of our machine or terminal. And subsequently, once we are done with it, then we'll see the complete entire structure in one go. That how is now, I mean, before the development, how our compiler is actually looking right now, and is there anything apart from these phases, front and back end phases? Is there anything which is required for these all phases? And subsequently, we'll discuss what exactly are the current strong points or advantages of this compiler, and what are some of the pitfalls of this compiler. And this is the overall schedule. And if the time persists in the last, then we'll start with the first, with the first step, that is, we have already discussed the lexical analysis. So in which we'll start with certain challenges which you people will face while implementing the lexical analyzer. So we'll discuss about the language specification, and subsequently we'll see how to model the lexical analyzer using the regular definitions, expressions, and the finite state machine. So obviously this much part is not going to be covered completely. So we'll take just the overview, what exactly needs to be done with respect to now the development point of view in the lexical analysis here. So let's cover first the backend phases here. So in the backend phases, we have the complete code generation first. Now we have the unambiguous representation of the program, and now we have to generate the assembly code for the current underlying machine here. But code generation is not, again, it's just a small jump. So we have to take here some series of jumps, and those series is just two. I mean, we have to take two jumps here. So we'll say we have the, let's say here, disambiguated parse tree, which we have extracted, as an output of the semantic analysis. So we'll not immediately convert into the machine code or the assembly language code. We'll introduce some intermediate level of code, which is not exactly the machine code, but it is somewhat closer to the machine code. And then once we had introduced the intermediate representation of the code, so as of now, what is intermediate representation of the code? It is not exactly the machine code, but it is very much closer to the machine code, which we are supposed to generate as a part of the compilation. So, and then if the intermediate code gets generated, then we'll subsequently transform into the machine code here. So let us see here. So as a part of the introductory level discussion, we said this is our goal, that abstractions at the source level code, I mean, in the disambiguated parse tree. So while you're writing the source language constructs. So these are the abstractions you have to generally handle. And similarly, now you have to convert these level of abstractions into the machine level abstractions here. So we need certain memory for storing our variables in the machine. And subsequently, as an optimized level, we need registers. We will keep our variables on the stack. We need the opcodes for these operators and all. We need macros, we need certain system libraries, and obviously we need certain by default interfaces to the operating system so that our machine code should exactly execute on the underlying infrastructure of the terminal. So this is exactly what we are going to see as an overview here. So code generation again. So as I said, it's a process of mapping from source level abstractions to the target machine abstractions. So here as I said, that we just need to map the source level abstractions to the target machine abstractions here, the machine level abstractions. And we have seen what are the available level of abstractions with us for the assembly language code here. But as I said, that it's going to be a two-step process. We will not immediately jump to the machine level code. However, we'll take 2 steps here. So a 2-step process from transforming the high-level abstractions to the low-level abstractions here. So initially, as I said, the intermediate code gets generated from the disambiguated parse tree. Right. So as of now, what is intermediate code? As I said, this code will act as an intermediary between the disambiguated parse tree as well as your complete assembly language code here, or machine code here. So we will say that this exactly is not the machine code, but still it is somewhat closer to the machine code. Fine. And then once we have generated this, then we'll finally, the final assembly language code or the target level code, or you can say machine code, would be generated from this intermediate code representation here. So these two processes one needs to be followed for for the final machine code generation here. Fine. What exactly needs to be done? So we'll just take an overview. I mean, we have the identifiers at the source level, at the disambiguated parse tree. So we'll map those identifiers to certain locations in the memory, or we'll use certain existing concepts of the storage location. This is what we'll do as a part of first step in the machine code generation. We'll also note down what are the operators which we have used at the source level abstractions, and we'll map it to certain opcodes or sequence of opcodes. So all of you are familiar that there are certain existing conventional opcodes available in the assembly language code, which we can utilize in place of these code operators here. Fine. But let's suppose if you do not have the existing opcodes for certain code operators here, then in that case, what will you do as a part of your code generation? My question to you. No responses. So my question is that there are some existing opcodes in the library of this assembly language code, which we use generally for these operators at the source level. But let's suppose you have introduced certain operator. I mean, for that, the opcode does not exist. So what will you do in that case usually?
Sir, we'll try to represent that operator using the existing opcodes by a combination, maybe creating some function or using
Correct. So I would say, let me use the macro. So macro will fulfill my purpose, right? Or I'll use any arbitrary combination of those opcodes and the job will be fulfilled. So this is one thing which we have to do. I mean, converting or transforming the source level abstractions step by step to the machine level code. Next, we have certain conditionals like if, else at the source level, while statements and other things, iterations. So for that, you all are familiar, we have such things. CMP, if you remember in the assembly language code, test and jump instructions. So that should also be get mapped. And obviously, we will use the layout parameter processing protocols, location for parameters, return values that needs to be specified. That if my function is returning some value, so that needs to be stored somewhere. So for that, I'll use certain passing protocol. The argument passing protocols. So here you just think that we are just again changing the representation. We are not dealing with the algorithmic level. We are not dealing with the logical level. So we are just changing the representation of the program, the representation which we have recently understood meaningfully. The context-wise, that is ambiguity parse tree. Fine. So these are some of the generalized steps that we have to study when we exactly focus on the code generation part here. Now, again, like if you recall that we consider the optimization in the source level abstraction, which I said it is considered to be an optional part. Similarly, we have the optimizer. We can plug in the optimizer at the machine level also, if you really feel so. Right? So here we'll say that the post-translational optimizations. Let's suppose you have generated the machine code. So there are certain, existing compilers. They say, okay, let me fully generate the machine code, and then I'll handle the optimization part. Then let's say I plug in the optimizer into my compiler, and that will give me the more efficient machine code generation. I'll not do any optimization at the source level or at the machine levels explicitly. I'll do later in the last. So this is, again, we can say this is post-translation optimization. And with respect to the machine level, we have certain such things. Addition with the 0, multiplication by 0, multiplication by 1. So we have to simplify such operations. And this level of optimization would obviously will be known by the machine-dependent code optimization. Because remember, earlier, whatever the optimization we did, that was completely machine independent, which was at the source level. Fine. So this is again an optional with respect to the machine level optimization here. So let's see now how exactly our thing is going to process here. So we have this disambiguated parse tree earlier, which we have generated with that one if else construct example. And here, what we are doing, we are just introducing the intermediate code, which exactly is somewhat similar to the machine code, but not exactly like this. So what we did here, for this variable b, so we need certain memory for storing this variable b here. So we are storing this variable, let's say, at an offset of 2 with respect to this frame pointer fp. Fine. And if I want to extract what is the exact value, storing at this address, so I'm just performing the summation of these two addresses, and with this particular thing, I'm just dereferencing it using the mem constant here. So I'm just extracting the value which is stored at the variable b here. Similarly, I have a constant 0. So for that, I have the construct in the assembly language code. So I have just replaced with the 0 here. I have another identifier a. So again, let's say I'm storing at an offset of, let's say 4. So with respect to, again, some frame pointer p, and we just add these addresses. So we just need to extract the value. So I just dereference that particular thing using the mem construct here. Similarly, the same variable b. So this is already stored at an offset of 2 with respect to this frame pointer here, which we have shown. So we add these two addresses and we just dereference for extracting the value here. And finally, in place of if, we have these conditional jump instructions in the machine level code. So we are just comparing and whatever we have substituted this move instruction. So we are just doing this thing, as a place of assignment operator thing here. So finally, this will get resolved. So this is just the one of the simpler example that how we are going to resolve the intermediate code here. Any comments, any question up to this point? Fine. So now we have the intermediate code available with us. So let's do some sort of this optimization part, because you are all familiar with the register and all. So why I should keep these things in the memory? I'll say I'll keep these things in the register here. So with that, with respect to that, I'll say I'm optimizing the code in an optional way. So what I did here, instead of storing at an offset of with respect to certain frame pointer, I'm storing A in, let's say, in register CX. I'm storing B in register DX, and I'm again the same variable A is storing in the register CX here. And the rest of the instructions are completely same, as you can verify from this intermediate code here. Fine. And now, finally, we'll just introduce a small subset of the machine code, the target code, which actually we have to do here. So we are just comparing these two values with that particular construct, and we are performing a conditional move with respect to the CX to the DX here. So this is our exact machine code. I have ignored certain instructions of loading and all, but just this is an example here of exactly introducing the machine code here. Fine, students, any issue, any comment you can raise on this? Fine. So here, this is the, yes, anyone wants to comment?
So, sir, optimization is always happening at the level of intermediate code and not the target code.
No. So that is not necessary. So as I said, it is completely flexible phase. I can introduce at any level. I can introduce at the level of intermediate code generation. I can introduce after the target code generation as well. So this is just one example where we introduced here, right? Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And
sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
So after going through all of these processes, we generated the assembly code, right?
Correct.
But for executing on the machine, we need the source code, right? The binary code. So, sir, is that
Right.
process also part of the compiler, or is it different than?
This is obviously going to be different then, because right now our just goal is for the compilation part. So let's don't worry about that execution part here. So I mean, we are just introducing the intermediate level of representations, and we have to deal with this code at the final. So for that, we have to take care of other buffers or all, so that we can redirect our direct source code at that level here.
Okay,
Is it
sir.
fine?
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is just the overview, guys. I mean, so now currently, I mean, our compiler structure is somewhat looking like this. So we recently covered the front end part, the language specific, the source language specific, and now this is just the overview of the backend, the machine specific, where we have to take the decisions corresponding to the underlying terminal architecture, the machine architecture. I should know what are the specifications of my machine where my code is going to be compiled and get executed here. So this guy, optimizer, its location is completely flexible. I could have switched this guy to somewhere here also. And this is the most frequent advantage of the optimizer, I mean, as a plugin. I mean, various compilers don't have even the flexibility of optimizer even. And some say, okay, I'll not deal with this guy somewhere as an intermediary. I'll just I'll implement or I'll develop a optimizer as a standalone plugin, and later on, if I'll need, I'll just plug it into my compiler, and this will give me some efficient code here. Fine, students. So this is what exactly we have just taken the overview of these phases. But before moving further, do you really think that we are skipping something? Is there any component which we have left out, which that needs to be a part of this compiler structure? Is there anything? Can anyone guess? We need certain more information. I mean, apart from these phases, anything, I mean, logically. We need certain databases, we need buffer, anything. No responses? Come on. This is what I'm asking. Yeah.
Symbol table.
Symbol table. So right now we don't know what exactly is symbol table, but let's put some light on it because this is exactly we need. But what exactly is symbols table? That we need to understand. So suppose, I mean, just let us took some, I mean, random this code written in a source language here. Suppose this part of the code you have injected, I mean, you have simply submitted to the lexical analyzer as a part of first step in the compilation process. What will exactly the lexical analyzer do in this thing here? Come on, guys, I need certain responses from your side. We already discussed this part. So what will the lexical analyzer do? I mean, as a part of an output. You should not take time on such, I mean, some
Sir,
easy
it would output the sequence of tokens, sir.
It would output the sequence of tokens. So
yes.
can you name those tokens right now?
So P equal to Q plus R semicolon.
No, but that is exactly the same thing we are submitting to the lexical analysis. So that should not be output.
It may classify these PQR as identifiers and equal to as operators and create a path using that.
So that exactly is the information that needs to be produced as an output. Not just because that this is the goal of the lexical, I must say, analyzer. It's because this information is required by our syntax analyzer. Because if we will not give that information in this context to the syntax analyzer will simply disregard that information, because syntax analyzer will say, I have to check the structure of your extracted tokens. So what I will do, if you will give me simply P, because I should know whether it is an identifier or it is an operator, right? So the output here, I mean, which this guy said, let me write that the first, it will be an identifier. I mean, this P, and another is, again, let's say some assignment operator. Again, we have identifier, let's say Q, and then we have some, let's say, additional operator plus, and again, we have this identifier, let's say R. So this is the information which exactly is required by the syntax analyzer, the parser, your parser. Because now the parser will utilize this information and he will utilize, he will utilize certain grammar rules. Okay, so grammar rule says whenever I'll see some assignment operator, so on the this right-hand side, there should be some expression followed by semicolon and there should be some identifier. So this is a rule here. So now if you will provide this information, so syntax analyzer will do the the needful here. And he will obviously generate one parse tree. And this parse tree will act as an input to your type checker or the semantic analyzer. Now, what does the type checker needs information about this? So what does type checker need? Guys, question to you people. What does semantic analyzer need some sort of information? What sort of information is required by the semantic analyzer?
The type of the identifiers.
So the type checker must know in which context these guys are occurring. I mean, what is the type of this identifier? What is the context of this assignment operator? What is the type of this again identifier? Right? So this information must be stored somewhere, and later on we'll assume that suppose based on this information, he has introduced the disambiguated parse tree. Let me write in short, disambiguated parse tree DAM. And here, let's assume we have the code generator. So what code generator needs here? So code generation part needs that, okay, I should know, again, the type of that particular identifier. Suppose that type is floating point, that float. So I need that 8 bytes of memory to reserve certain location for storing those variables. I need certain scope. So all this information, this information, this information also, what actually, let me write here, the actual strings, these strings, right? The token information, the type information, the memory information. So with respect to each and every construct should be stored somewhere. And that is where that guy said that we need one data structure which actually stores this information about all the programming language constructs. And we'll call it as a usually symbol table. Now, what exactly is a symbol table here? So as of now, we'll study this thing in detail when we are discussing the implementation issues in the lexical analysis phase. But right now, you should consider that it's nothing but an array of records, symbol table. So, so I have one symbol table which is storing some information like this with respect to the P here, the type information, the memory information, the token information. Right, and it is very efficient to use such information. Let's suppose if I am replacing this R with the P here. So I need not to store the multiple information. So this will also get redirected here and this will also get redirected here. So as of now, we have it's an array of records which is going to store certain information. And the more we'll focus on the lexical analysis part when we'll discuss the implementation part and the specification part in the lexical analysis. So symbol table. So information required about the source program identifiers during compilation. The category of the variable, whether it is a keyword or an identifier. All right. So suppose if I would have written something like this, let's say. Fine. So and already my language specification is saying that this is a keyword. Let's assume like this. As a part of layman construct. So it will say it is not an identifier, it is a keyword. So that information has to be stored somewhere. So I'll say, let's suppose somewhere in the later days, if I upload the language specification document as on Nalanda, and I have to explicitly tell you that what are the existing keywords in your language specification. You can't assume on your own. Probably I could have said that don't consider it as a keyword, it should be considered always as an identifier. Fine. So that's the thing you need to understand here. So types of the variable, quantity of the storage required, address in the memory. So this sort of information is generally required by the machine and specification. So symbol table is a data structure that stores all this information in some repository, and every phase of the compiler must have access to this particular data structure. And now the revised structure of your compiler is looking like somewhat like this. So this should be accessible to all the respective phases here, guys. All the respective phases. So this is our, just the final structure of the compiler, which is looking like here. So anything, any comment, any question, if you want to raise, you can ask. Otherwise, we can then move forward. Fine. Yeah.
Sir, like the context-free grammar has not been shown in this diagram.
Context-free?
Like the grammar rules. Grammar rules.
So why there is a need to show the context-free grammar rules here? So I think this phase is clearly depicting that thing here, syntax analyzer. So syntax analyzer must follow the context-free grammar rules, which we have written in your language specification document. Is it making sense?
Yes, sir.
Fine. Similarly, we have certain semantic rules. So that we have to generate on our own while we are generating with the SDTs. So everything we can't show here, it's just the name of the phases, what is an input to that particular step, and what should be the output to that particular step here. Now, the most important part, guys. Remember, in the very first lecture, I said that we discussed about the first compiler, which was introduced by the John Backus. So I mentioned that point that the acceptability of that compiler was, was huge in those days, and in the current era also. We are living in the 21st century. That if you will look at the basic logical structure, it hasn't been changed at all, guys. I mean, if you go back, it has been around almost or more than 65 years, and still we are using the conventional structure of the compiler. That means we have to introduce some of the strong points of the compiler. So come on, one by one. What do you think? What should be the strongest point or advantages of the compiler? What we have discussed as an overview. Come on, guys, please, one by one. No advantages? I mean, just learning the phases is our goal. Come on, guys. At least when I'm asking certain questions, so I need at least one answer from your side, either relevant or irrelevant. Yeah, please.
So without having a compiler, we won't be able to write any high-level code.
Fine. So let's assume that's why we have the compiler. But now, assume we have the compiler. So what should be the strong points? I mean, based on the things which we have discussed.
It should be able to.
It should be able to what?
Like if we write a code, then it should be able to generate the parse tree in a disambiguated form, and there shouldn't be any ambiguity regarding that. There could be two possibilities for a code.
For the interruption. So again, you are saying the same thing, which exactly compiler is supposed to do. But something, I mean, you want to highlight in a form of generalized manner. I mean, what you are saying is relevant, but again, that is already we have discussed, and that is the goal of the phase.
Okay, sir.
So we can know the errors at the compilation time, and once a code is compiled, it will run faster than like if you use an interpreter.
Then I'll say you are comparing, let's say, compiler between an interpreter in that case. All right, let's say. So the most important advantage, guys, as I said, with respect to the, the complexity of the phases here, it's very highly modular in nature. And we should not think this advantage with respect to the theoretical concepts. I mean, how it is very modular, as I said in the very initial sessions, that we are going to make a huge, instead of taking a huge jump, we are going to take very small jumps. Like lexical analysis is supposed to do only a very small part of the task. So syntax analyzer has no interference with it. Similarly, parser or syntax analyzer has no interference with the semantic analyzer or the other respective thing here. So each and every phase has some logical coherent set of activities. So if I'll find some bug, so it will be easier for me to go to the respective phase and just touch that part of the code or customize that part of the code. So this is very important property, that it is just following the complete modularization part. I mean, it's completely modular. And softwares in real world scenario should be completely modular. Seems relevant this point. Any other advantage which I haven't heard from your side yet, I mean, which is very important and which is most important property of the compiler itself? All right. So let me highlight few points. Yes, please, if you can.
Like I thought that it is a logical reduction of the errors because like first we check for the syntactical errors, then the semantic error.
Correct. So what you are saying is one of the same thing that every guy has some fixed logical set of activities, right? So that could be resolved at that time only.
Also, if we want to convert a code for different machines, once compiler
Right.
converts it into machine code, now the translator's work is just to convert the machine code, and this might
Correct.
be easy than converting the original code.
Correct. So this is the most important property which this guy has just highlighted here. So that is also the next one. I mean, if I'll generalize is that compilers are always retargetable. What do you mean by this? I mean, I'm not asking to the same guy. I mean, other people, if they have understood this thing. Compilers are generally considered to be retargetable. So here, if there is a single language, I mean, a single source language, any high-level language, and multiple machines available to you, then you can utilize the same front end can be used for all the machines. So I'll say that there is a single source language and there are multiple machines sitting in your lab. So you have to design the compiler and you will say, oh, come on, sir, I need not to design in that case multiple front ends. I'll use the same front end because I have only the same source language. So that will fulfill my purpose. Similarly, the opposite to it, if there are many languages and single machine for which we have to design the compiler, then same backend could be used. So these two statements generally denote the idea, denotes this fact that part of the backend and part of the front end could be used very much frequently so that your whole compiler can be retargetable. Fine. Suppose if I ask you a question in a different way, that if you want to design a new C compiler for the let's say for the new machine, so what will you do in that case? Come on, guys, be quick on this. If you want to design a new C compiler, let's say for a new machine.
Sir, we'll take front end of the existing compiler and make a new backend for the
relevant. So I do not need to design the new front end. So I'll say, okay, this is a new machine, so I'll do the needful with respect to the backend. Fine. So that's the thing here. And let's suppose the vice versa. So let's suppose if we have a new machine and if we have the same machines and some, let's suppose in this 21st century, some new language has just come up, right? Let's suppose the Python. We don't know about the Python. It's a completely new language. So you say, oh, come on, I can use the same backend, but I have to develop a new front end for this new language. So this justifies the fact that this is one of the interesting property of the compiler, guys. That part of the source end and the this front end and the back end are generally utilized so that your compiler can be retargetable. Fine. Yeah, same thing which I was saying again and again. Source and machine independent code optimization is also possible, which we have already highlighted this thing earlier also. That it is quite possible that I could do the source code optimization independent of the completely machine specification. And it is also possible that I could do only the machine specific code optimization. And it is also possible that even I can ignore the complete optimizer as a part of the development of the compiler, and I build a standalone compiler, optimizer, and later I plug in to my target code, and that will probably give me the efficient code, efficient machine code. So it is completely flexible, the optimizer part. So like I mentioned, that some industry first focus on the making the complete functional specification of the compiler correct. So they just focus on making the compiler correct, generating the machine correct, and then they work on the optimization part. So they just plug in the optimizer and that will do the needful. So this is one of the few advantages of the compiler. Limitations of the compiler, guys. I mean, so there are certain pitfalls of the compiler that we can't ignore. And again, these are very important. All right. So instead of asking, let me highlight straightforward. So the first very generic point that the design of the programming language has a big impact on the complexity of the compiler. Can anyone justify this point? I mean, since I have already shown you the complete statement.
Sir,
yeah, please.
Sir, C has very simple constructs like loops, if-else statements, etc. But Python has much more complex constructs like generators, classes, objects.
Absolutely. So this guy has rightly justified that suppose it's not, I mean, we have discussed in the last few sessions what exactly is the overview of the compiler structure. And it seems to be very easy, guys. But actually, in the rigorous environment, it's not easy. So this guy is just giving you one example. So if I have to design a C compiler, let's say the GCC compiler, so my life would be somewhat simpler. But at the same time, if I have to design a compiler, let's say for C++ or Python, so the different language constructs will introduce a different level of complexity. So I cannot just introduce a plugin for different programming language platforms as one standalone compiler. So designing of programming languages, the complexity of the programming languages will discuss or will have a huge impact on the complexity of the compiler. Fine. And suppose some of you may argue, okay, come on, GCC compiler, it's more than 1 lakh lines of code. It is also rigorous. So let's suppose usually what we'll do on campus for on-campus students, so it generally sum around to 5,000 lines of code. And let's suppose it is easier. So in that case, we are thinking about this particular thing. So it depends on the language specification document that how much specifications you have introduced in your language for which you have to design the compiler. Lot of work is repeatable. I mean, in the development of the compiler here. Can anyone justify this point? And again, this is just the opposite what we have discussed as an advantage. Can anyone justify this point? All right. So consider if you have S different source languages and M different computer architectures or a target machine, then in that case, we have to develop S into M compilers. So you can see, I mean, for each and every different language, we have to target a different machine. So for that, we have to build a standalone compiler. For the same source language, for different machine, we have to again build a different compiler. So, I mean, this is very tedious task for this thing here. That for S different languages and M different machines, we have to develop the S into M compilers here. Let me put some light on it, on this concept here. And this problem is generally known as the S into M problem of the compiler. I mean, as per your Dragon book. So this is very well-known problem here. So what does this problem say is that this is the scenario here. If we have these different source languages and different target machines, so we have to consider these all scenarios for different compilers here, S into M compilers here. But this problem can be easily resolved. Can anyone guess what should be the strategy for it?
By building some kind of virtual machine or an interface which can run on any machine, and the languages.
Correct. So I need as an intermediary which should act as an interface, and that has to be developed only one time. Right. So let me just introduce one scenario that I have introduced one intermediate language generator here. Let me call it as a ILG. And every source language have the sufficient capability that to generate this particular intermediate language, the same intermediate language. And every backend machine must have the capability to accept this particular language, to consume this language. Fine, guys? Then in that case, this problem will be turned out to be S plus M compilers, because in that case, I have to only generate this much source, what we call the front ends and the back ends here. And this will fulfill our purpose. So what we need right now, we need one universal intermediate language, which was, lately in 1958, just after the introduction of the first compiler was introduced, which actually reduced the development effort of compiling many different languages to different architectures, like we are seeing. So the scenario would look like this. This is going to be resolved by S plus M, in which we generally need one universal intermediate language generator. Now, again, this would act as a switch box. This component. So again, I'm repeating the same thing. So every front end should be able to generate this particular universal language, so that this common language platform could be easily consumed by each one of these machines. Then their life would become somewhat easier. Right? And now I just want to clarify one doubt which may or may not arise into your mind. The structure which we have seen earlier of the compiler, in which we have seen the intermediate language, which I said as a part of that example, which was very machine specific, right? But not exactly the machine code. So that thing is completely different, and this thing is completely different. So what are intermediate language generators? So we are very shortly, when we actually jump into the third module of this course component, the intermediate code generation. So we'll study all these particular guys. So 3 address code, postfix notation, syntax tree, and DAG. So these are all commonly used as intermediate code generation techniques. And every front end has the capability to produce these things, and the machine target has the capability to refer it in the same manner. So this will resolve the purpose of this SM plus compilers. And even I will add one because we have to also generate the intermediate code generator as a part of the development process of the compiler. So this is the exact figure which should be accepted. Fine, guys. Any comment, any question up to this point? All right. Now, just as a part of this last notification, as a part of this overview, that it's not just the compiler who actually get involved in the overall process of the compilation and the execution of the program. There are some other components which actually support the overall process of the compilation. And you may or may not be aware of this. And I accept that you should be aware of this. Can anyone highlight what exactly are the other components which should surround the compiler, which should facilitate the compiler in the overall process of the compilation? Come on, guys, need answers from your side. Because we are just learning one small thing, that is a compiler, but we need some adjacent components. Yes.
Sir, memory in the RAM memory for storing some small components.
So I'll say that will fulfill the purpose, let's say interface to the operating system libraries at the machine level. That will fulfill the purpose. I'm saying some standalone components.
So the operating system itself.
Okay, any other?
Command line interface.
Command line interface, that is acceptable. So I'll say that I need certain command line interfaces. I need an editor on which I will probably write my code, and that will probably transform into source level instructions. And that code needs to be submitted to the compiler. So compiler will generate the machine level code that will submit to the get assembler. assembler obviously will pass that code, let's say, to the linker or loader so that certain other things could be resolved at the machine level instructions. We also need debugger, right? Because if my code is suffering from some errors or bugs, so debugger will highlight the important errors, and that has to be resolved manually by the programmer here. And again, this process will go, iterating again and again here. So such all tools, some of these tools, should support each other for efficient program development here. Fine, guys? So lastly, I would say, again, which I said earlier, that overall structure of almost all the compilers is similar to the existing structure. Which we have seen as just Fortran 1 project, the first compiler. So front-end phases of the compiler are, usually they consider a very small fraction of the total time. The main rigor is involved in the back-end phases. Yeah. So this is what, the whole story of related to the history and the overview of the phases of the compiler here. And now we'll discuss step by step what are the implementation steps that needs to be followed as a part of implementing the lexical analyzer, what are the specifications that is required for the lexical analyzer, and how we are going to model this complete component using the regular definitions, regular expressions, and the finite state machine. So this would be the goal of our next class. So these first 3 sessions, we just focus on understanding the overview of these compiler phases, guys. So now if you have any comment, anything you want to ask, please, just let me know. Otherwise, I have to make few announcements then. Anything, guys? Okay. So guys, I just want to clarify a few points. First of all, I just need to clarify a few points related to the existing course components of the compiler course. So don't think as it is that the project has been completely scrapped out from this existing handouts of the compiler course. It is not scrapped out. Let me clarify this. So the thing here is that within few days when we are almost done with the lexical analysis phases, I'll upload the specification document. You have to design the transition notation diagram for all the keywords, and you have to develop the lexical analyzer and the other things here. But this time, the learning which you are developing for this particular in the regular lecture sessions or in the implementation sessions, which I am going to conduct in the regular lecture sessions, or sometimes some extra lectures we'll take, that learning is going to be evaluated in those 2 online components. That thing has to be clear. So there will not be any explicit evaluation of the standalone project component. So the learning which you are gaining through these lecture sessions and some of the implementation sessions, that will be assessed only in those 2 online components. That is online classes. So that's the thing I have to clarify this, because I got one email recently which is highlighting this issue. So I want that I should highlight this issue in the lecture itself. So if some of you, it's up to you. Whenever I upload the language specification document, it's up to you. You make the groups on your own and start developing your lexer and parser and so on and so forth, and keep discussing in the regular implementation session issues which we have to conduct in the regular lecture sessions. Because from here onwards, everything will be discussed according to the implementation and the language specification document. But explicitly, your evaluation is going to happen only in those 2 online quizzes here. So this is the thing I just want to clarify. Now, if you have anything, you can discuss.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, like you said that you will give a language specification document. So is the creating the lexer and parser, this is for our own practice and for discussion, or
how? So whatever quizzes. I understood your question. So this is just whatever we are discussing in the regular lecture sessions. With respect to that, I'll upload the specifications. So if whosoever wants to done this thing as a part of project, as a part in groups, so they can go for it, right? So it's not something mandatory, or it's not going to be explicitly well. So the learning of all these things, the regular implementation issues of the lectures and sessions will only be evaluated in those 2 online components, these quizzes here.
So you're saying that if we do this project on our own, like it would help us in doing those.
It's not on your own. Let's be clear. So I'm there 24/7. So as I said, that every discussion from here onwards will be with respect to the implementation issues and the language specification document. Correct. So you have to discuss with me, I mean, related to whatever you are designing with respect to the lecture here. But it's not going to be explicitly evaluated in this, online scenario.
So, sir, you mean that the assignment will be based on the classes and the quizzes will be based on the assignment, something like that?
Quizzes will be based on whatever we are discussing in the regular lecture sessions related to the whatever the courses we are covering with respect to the regular lecture sessions here. And obviously that will consider all the implementation issues which we are discussing regularly in the classes as well. So the learning will be utilized will be assessed only in the online component, that is the quiz 1 and the quiz 2. So project, if you want to explicitly done, you can do with your own, just form your own groups and just, show me the regular outputs if you want. Is it fine? So this is the clarification I just want to make here. All right, guys, I'm stopping here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.